School board meetings are now open to the public, but the district will comply with the Iowa Department of Public Health and the governor's recommendations as to gatherings and social distancing. To comply with the 6-foot social distancing directive, the boardroom has been arranged to allow for 6 feet between attendees. This, however, has resulted in a limit to being placed on the number of individuals from the public who may attend in person. Capacity of the room to allow for social distancing is 30 members of the public. Masks are required to be worn in the boardroom, but you may remove your mask if you speak. As with prior board meetings, you may access the board meeting remotely as well, but open forum will be in person only. Director Poshin, could you please read our board priorities?
Priorities. The Davenport School Board establishes the following priorities to ensure the academic success of all students. Provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, security, and happiness of students and staff. Direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Director Kleindrum, would you please read the mission and vision statements?
Mission statement: enhance each student's abilities by providing a quality education enriched by our diverse community. Vision statement: education that challenges conventional thinking, prepares all students to compete in a global society, and inspires our students, parents, and staff and community to answer the question, what if?
All right, student board reports.
I can kick us off. So at Central, we have successfully started our first term. Students have hit the ground running with their online or in-person coursework. Our yearbook recently won an award called the Newbert Award at the Iowa High School Press Association, so that's fantastic. But on a darker note, I know a lot of students are getting anxious about the increasing case positivity for COVID and what that means for being in school, and if we're going to go online, when are we going to know if we're going online? So the 21.8% positivity rate has students a little concerned, but it's nothing we can't work through. So that's all I've got to share today.
Hi, my name is Sophia Heller from Davenport North, and at North, recently we're having an online National Honor Society induction ceremony. We were going to have it in person, but then we switched to online because we decided that'd probably be the safer option. The drama club is doing a sort of cabaret to display individual events that would have been performed at ThesFest this year by students. These include monologues, song and dance, and technical events. And then as fall sports come to an end, our winter sports are beginning, and we hope to see our boys basketball team have another great season, along with all the other sports, but I hope I get to see another state game like the one last year. I'm really thankful to be able to travel to Central to take my AP Gov course, which is an opportunity I'm not allowed to have, or not allowed, I'm not able to have at North. So I'm just very thankful that the Davenport Schools allows me to travel during my open block to another school to take a course. Speaking of AP Gov, I was wondering if I may be excused after I speak to go do my AP Gov homework. Oh. And then also, for concerns, like Meredith said, the 21.8% growth rate, and I know that we gotta apply for the shutdown with the state and our concerns with that and what's happening. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, student board members. Before I go on to board reports, I do want to acknowledge that President Potts is participating remotely, as well as Interim Superintendent Schneckloff. They are up in the sky. Are there any board reports? Director Snyder.
This isn't really a board report, but you guys never have to ask permission if you need to leave. Your schoolwork obviously always comes first. If you guys have things to do, by all means, do them. We do appreciate the time when you are here, but obviously you have to prioritize. So no, you never have to ask permission.
Director Hayes.
I went to an event on Saturday. It was Keena's House of Love. It was an event that a young lady put on, inviting students in the district to come and participate. There was a talent show, and there's a lot of food and spoken words, and it was a nice little event. Not very well attended, but under the circumstances, totally understand it. But hopefully it's something that she'll do again after COVID, that more students are able to participate and enjoy that day. It was from 1 to 5 over at Beyond the Baseline, Above the Baseline. Beyond the Baseline. So I just wanted to say that there are actually people in the community that are doing things to engage our students.
Director Klein Jerome.
I would just like to give a shout out to Greg Smith, Jason Bransenberg, sorry if I messed that name up, Team Alicia Massey, Doyle Massey, and Corey Williams and family. I understand they created all the face shields as part of the PPE plan, and they utilized our 3D printers, and this is long overdue. Thank you for doing that for the district.
Director Poston.
The Finance Committee met last Wednesday. Karen and I met with Superintendent Schneekloth, Bill Decker with the AEA, Lisa Cruz, and Gary Sinclair. Karen and I are both very happy with the format that we're getting set up for the Finance Committee. We'll be meeting once a month. We focus most of our time on a line item budget. We're looking at cuts that have to be made for this year. And Karen and I are anxious to get started on next year's budget, and because I think we're also going to have to be making some additional cuts. I think some of the report will be brought out in the superintendent's report later on and go into a little more details. But a couple things that came up currently in our budget, 85% of our budget is salaries. The norm for most districts is 80%. So there's going to have to be some sort of change there. We're also looking at the special ed deficit. Currently, we have about 9.7 students per teacher. For most districts, it's between 15 and 20. So something's going to have to be done to make up that deficit, and I think the superintendent will go into some more details. But we look at the relationship that we are going to have with Gary Sinclair as being very positive, and setting up a line item budget, something that should have been done a long time ago. And again, we're anxious to delve into this and get our budget on track.
Are there any other board reports?
Did you have anything to add to that, Karen?
Nope, that's good.
The only thing I have, Superintendent Schneckloff and myself, Thursday night last week attended virtually the annual UEN meeting, where we kind of discussed the priorities for next year, and then we did some breakout sessions with other districts. It's nice to see all those people on there because you get to talk to people from different areas and stuff, so I would definitely encourage everybody to try to jump on that next year. Moving on to communications, open forum. And I shut my mic off. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak should fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. The Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president will set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak during open forum. The board asks that no charge or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community during open forum. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. And 2 minutes. The president's not here, so the vice president says you can have 2 minutes. How's that? And we have two open forum requests, Mary Ray and Karen Gordon. And when you come up, we'll go in that order. When you come up to the mic, please say your name and address. Mary Ray, you are up.
Hi, my name's Mary Ray. I live at 1520 West 3rd Street in Davenport. I'm the building secretary at Hayes Elementary. I'm here tonight to speak to you regarding the early retirement incentive plan. As I was going through the agenda for tonight's meeting, I read through the requirements for early retirement. Right away, it stood out to me that the only people being offered this incentive are teachers, administrators, and non-bargaining employees. Nowhere in the plan did I see anything mentioning the other bargaining units that work for Davenport schools. I'm talking about the employees that fall under the Ask Me clerical, custodial, food service, and paraeducator contracts, as well as maintenance employees. In this plan, it is stated that one of the purposes is to show appreciation for our staff's service. This is a direct quote from the plan. To those of us not being offered this incentive, it looks as if we are not appreciated for the work we do. Another purpose stated in the plan is to save DCSD funds through the reduction in staff and/or replacement of savings. It is within the Ask Me bargaining groups that there are many employees with several years of longevity who, if offered the incentive and opted to take it, could save the district money, but we are not being offered this opportunity. I myself would not qualify, and I'm not looking to retire, so this is not about me, but about the other ones in our bargaining units who could qualify and would accept this if offered. We have several hardworking, dedicated Ask Me members who feel very underappreciated for the work they do day in and day out. I feel with the way this plan is presented, this is just another way the district is showing them they are correct in having those feelings. So, with us not being offered early retirement, the way I see it, this means none of our jobs will be lost due to the $4 million budget cuts we have to make this year. It is for these reasons I ask the board to consider what their decision will be when this agenda item comes up later tonight and you are asked to make a decision to approve this agenda item. Please think about all DCSD employees, not just teachers, administrators, and non-bargaining employees. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on this.
Thank you, Mary Ray. Karen Gordon, you are up.
Good evening. My name is Karen Gordon. Is this on? No? Okay.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. No? There. Hi, my name is Karen Gordon. My address is 1727 Fernwood Avenue in Davenport, 52803. I am a parent of 2 Davenport students, and I am a 6-year employee of the district. I am here tonight to address the rampant spread of COVID-19 in our community and schools. I wish I could say that I feel safe in the school environment, but I would be lying. Students rarely cover their nose with their masks, and their teachers rarely correct them. Several students don't or can't wear masks at all, and those are often the rooms where multiple staff members have to be in close contact with those students all day long. Typically, some of those staff members, myself included, have a traveling schedule where we visit multiple rooms a day. This increases exposure and risk. We know that this virus is spread widely through aerosols. This is a fact with mounds of scientific evidence to support it. We also know that there is no way to effectively police everyone in a school building about their proper mask wearing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Transmission is high. People talk. Today alone, I have heard of 5 separate elementary schools in Davenport with between 6 and 18 staff members out for positive tests or quarantine requirements. This is not sustainable, and this is not fair to educators or students. Sub shortage was a major issue last year, and it's even more pronounced now. Building administration is stressed to the max trying to facilitate coverage for absences. I am begging you to address the dangerously high rolling positivity rate of COVID-19 in Scott County and the implications for our schools. The Iowa COVID-19 tracker website, which is more detailed and consistent than that of the state of Iowa, shows Scott County's 14-day rolling positivity rate to be 37.75%, which is almost 2% higher than it was when I emailed you all this morning. On the Department of Education website, the 14-day rolling percentage rate is 21.6. Regardless of which is accurate, those are frightening and dangerous numbers. The Department of Education Return to Learn guidance states that with over 20% positivity over a 14-day rolling period, and I quote, healthcare resource concerns, temporary continuous remote learning for an entire school building or district for up to 14 days may be requested. End quote. I realize that our district is in a tight spot with having to answer to the state for all sorts of things. However, it is in the best interest of our staff and students and families to apply for the waiver immediately, and even perhaps to insist on fully remote before receiving the waiver in a ask forgiveness, not permission move. Teachers and staff are scared. To be afraid for one's health and life, on top of being overwhelmed with this year's workload, and also having to cover for other staff out ill or quarantining is asking way too much. Our students desperately need to see good role models in our community right now. Taking the lead in protecting our community by first protecting our staff and students would be an excellent show of compassion and care for all of us. Please take the steps to stop the spread by insisting on going fully remote for at least 2 weeks, and preferably through winter break. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. May I have a motion on the consent agenda?
Mr. Vice President,
Director Hayes,
I move that the board accept the consent agenda as written.
is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Beck. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, I will call for the vote. Director Hayes,
Yes.
Director Beck,
Yes.
Director Poston,
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Klein Jerome,
Yes.
Director Potts,
Yes.
and my vote is yes. Motion passes. May I have a motion on approval of bills?
Mr. President,
Director Beck,
I move that the board adopt the following resolution recommended by the administration for the adoption of bills from the bill listing periods of October 22nd, 2020 to November 4th, 2020. Resolved, all claims presented to the board having been duly certified as correct by the secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn on the treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and salaries be approved as presented for the periods of October 22nd, 2020 to November 4th, 2020.
is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Poston. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, I will call for the vote. Director Beck,
Yes.
Director Poston,
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Klein Jerome,
Yes.
Director Hayes,
Yes.
Director Potts,
Yes.
and my vote is yes. Motion carries. Superintendent report.
Vice President Goza, I would just want to report that the administration is working and exploring with the state of Iowa about the options that are available for our students and our teachers and staff in terms of 100% online or continuing in the hybrid model that we're in now. We've been given the charge late this afternoon to explore that option further with the report that needs to be filed and working closely with Mr. Decker and the state of Iowa to see if we can't get some answers to the questions that we have about that. And I would say to you that we've asked our head nurse, Gina Ekstrand, to be present this evening if there was any questions in particular about this, the rate of what we're dealing with in our buildings and our schools, and she's agreed to be here. So if you have any questions around not so much the application process, but the current reality of what's going on in Davenport, she's happy to address that.
I have one question for you, but then I do have a question
Come on up, Gina.
for Gina. So for you, I know initially the number was 15%, the number that the governor gave was 15% positivity plus 10% absenteeism. And if I remember correctly, there was a threshold above that where positivity rates were high enough that absenteeism didn't matter. Am I correct on that? And if so, what were those positivity rates?
Yeah, I think Gina can address that. That's one of the things we talked about tonight,
Okay.
so she'll share that with us.
So I'll address that for you. If we were between 15 and 20% positivity in the county and had 10% absenteeism is when we could apply to go fully remote. Last week, our absenteeism rate was at 3.6%, so we were not even close to meeting the 10% absenteeism. Once we hit above 20% positivity rate in the county, and today we were at 21.3, I believe, or 21.6, then that 10% absenteeism falls away, and we don't have to look at that. I will tell you, today in the district, we were only at 4.02%, so we still aren't hitting that 10% absenteeism related to illness, meaning related to students who have symptoms or who have designated illnesses, whether that's COVID or something else. Today we were at 4.03%. So we still aren't close to that 10%. But I will say our numbers so far this week, and it's only Monday, are much higher than what we have seen in the 2 previous weeks. So that's something that we're watching very closely.
So then my question is twofold. Number one, can you speak to the availability of resources in the county to deal with people who might be severely ill? And number two, is there a situation when you, as a health professional, would recommend that we go 100% online, whether or not the state approves it?
So I can't speak to hospital beds. I don't know those numbers. Typically, the health department and Genesis and Trinity will get together during the week. I think it's on Wednesdays, and make those kinds of announcements. I can't speak to those currently, what those numbers look like in our county or in Davenport even, this side of the river. I'm not sure. I can tell you that what we're seeing in the district is not school spread. We can share numbers. Today, we are at 62 positive cases in the district. That's the number of both staff and students who are out ill today with a positive case of COVID. And so those cases, however, have not been connected to school spread, and that is what we're seeing across the county. All of the districts in the county are saying the same thing. I think if you walked into our schools, you would see that for the most part, students are doing a good job, the best that they can with wearing masks. We have only about 30% of students in attendance, so our kids are spread out, they're socially distanced. So we've done a great job with our mitigation here at school. But I can tell you we do have a lot of students and staff who are in quarantine related to exposure in the community or in their homes. Today we had 212 students in quarantine related to exposure from home or from someone in the community, and 60 staff. And so our struggle, to be honest, is a little bit more on the staff end of those things. That 212 students is out of 17,000, right? I mean, 15,000. So like I said, our attendance rate for students is still very good. But the staff is, I think, a little bit more of a struggle for us.
Okay. Yeah, I know the science is, a lot of the studies of sort of school return have shown that the students themselves are not major drivers, but that people are bringing it from home, which is still not something we want, right? And I think it's important that you mention the staff, because without staff, we can't have school.
Right.
So thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Decker, you had something you wanted to add?
I mean, I'll just give you a little bit of an update. AEA-wide, Davenport is not an outlier. I I think there are 2 districts in the entire AEA that have begun a waiver process. One of those is a district that is dealing with it exactly like the conversation that you just described, where it's around the staff issue more than the student issue. There are 2 parts of the waiver process. One is the statistics of positivity and and student attendance. Another part of it is what is the plan for student instruction. And so there is an effort being made in the district right now to get that taken care of so that we have a good plan. And when the waiver application goes in, we don't want that part to be a problem. The other piece of it I would tell you is tomorrow there's a meeting of all of the AEA superintendents at noon, and there's a meeting to discuss Davenport with the Department of Ed at 2. So this is certainly an issue that is not being set aside. There is action going on, and I think that we'll end up in a good spot. We'll end up with a good plan so that there is instruction for kids going on, and we'll be working to expedite that as much as the Department of Ed will let us. I don't believe that it is an option. It's not built in for any district to do it, but certainly we would not want to be in the position of saying, let's just go do what we want to do, regardless of what the department says. That should not even be on the table or in your mind at all. We'll get this taken care of. The DE is going to be very supportive of the conversation, but also supportive of the kids. We want to have a good instructional plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought this up during your report because I was trying to figure out, because we can't put it on the agenda. The agenda has to be posted 24 hours before the meeting. I do appreciate everybody sending. I probably had a dozen or more emails, but that's why we can't just add it to the agenda. It has to be on the agenda 24 hours prior. So I do appreciate you guys bringing that up and getting some of that stuff answered. If you will notice, the agenda did get a little flip-flopped. We are going to be doing the discussion items first, and then we'll be doing the items that require action. And the first topic for discussion is the financial update.
Is Gary gonna come out at this point, Bill, or are you?
He's supposed to, yes.
Is Gary?
I don't, maybe he didn't know the flip-flop, and I don't know if he's on yet or not.
Mr. Sinclair, are you there?
How about if we would jump to citation, and I will try to let Mr. Sinclair know that we're ready for that.
We will do that. We will switch and go to the citation update.
We've asked Dr. Klipsch to share with us the bulk of the work that we're doing right now in addressing the citations that were in front of us. And he's going to share with us where we're at and where we're going as soon as tomorrow on some of the action work. So Dr. Klipsch.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if Brenda, that document would be able to be pulled up.
Joe's doing it from in here.
All right. Well, while Joe is pulling that up, I'm here to report out on our citation focused on crisis response and violence prevention. Of the different citations that we have, the CRVP, as we're referring to it, is priority number 1 with guidance from the state, that this is the first step, that before we can address academics in the correct way in these other areas, we need to ensure that all of our staff and all of our students feel safe in our schools, emotionally and physically. And so we've had I'm really excited about the work that's been done so far. And this is probably more information than you really need to see here, but it's just intended to be an overview of the structure and timeline leading up to winter break and how we're rolling things out. So first off, there is a lot of acronyms on that screen, and so I tried to identify what some of those were at the top. So there's a district crisis response and violence prevention team, including myself and Corey Guy, who is the co-lead, And those other names up there are representative of different departments from learning supports, special education, curriculum, equity. And so we have these different groups that are helping to design and implement the plan that we are putting together to address this urgent need. The purpose of that group, as it mentions, is to plan, design, and implement, and follow up, and to support our buildings. So each of those members has a few buildings, 4 or 5 buildings that they will be supporting in this work to kind of break that up into smaller pieces so it's easier to get the information to those that need it at the building level. We also have a principal calibration team. Well, first off, the district team meets every week all day on Tuesday. We blocked off our whole schedule to really put in the work on this. And then that's on Tuesdays. On Wednesdays, we have a principal calibration team, which is representative of 2 principals at every level. And we say, here's where we're going, here's the presentations we're looking at, what do you see for feedback as far as how that's going to be rolled out into the building, what do we need to know on the principal end, so that we're really communicating with them and getting their guidance and feedback on that. And then we also have a community team, and some of you have been a part of that in the past. It's about 40 different people representative of different agencies. We have some parents starting in the group, community members, and some staff as well. And because the idea being that this work is not just happening in the schools, it has to be done with the whole community. And so the idea is what can we do differently as a district? How can we better communicate with you? And then what can you bring to the table also to help to support us in that work? So there's some information, and although it does say through December 18th, that just means that this is where this timeline goes. But really what we're doing is creating a sustainable plan that isn't beyond just this year or this semester. We want to create a plan that provides consistency in how we prevent violence in all of our schools and how we respond to crises, because we know that that is foundational to everything else that we're doing. And so a few pieces of the timeline, and Brenda, you can scan down a little bit, or Joe, who's ever running the show up there. Last week, we had a presentation for our district leadership team, and the goal of that presentation was to build consensus on the idea that crisis response and violence prevention is paramount and fundamental and should be the priority for our professional development right now. So we provided a presentation, our district team did, to that group, and had them fill out a Google Form survey, and came back with complete consensus that everyone at our district leadership is on board. Tomorrow, we are having our Leadership Academy, which is included all building principals and building leadership teams. We're doing that virtually, and the purpose of that is the same. So we did this with district leadership, and now we're doing an expanded version for all of our buildings, having them fill out the same consensus form to indicate that every adult in our district is on board with this. So our building leaders are going to get this information tomorrow, and then they are going to bring that back to their staff. So we have our district leadership, our building leadership, and then all staff is going to get this same presentation with the same feedback form. The goal being that every adult in Davenport schools is understanding and on board with the great urgency and need of addressing violence in our schools and consistently responding to crisis in our schools. So beyond teachers and administrators, our food service staff, our paras, our custodians, our bus drivers, everybody is going to be a part of this and get this information. And so we're excited about that. So that's kind of coming through right now, again, really hitting off tomorrow. And then in December, we have our next Leadership Academy, which will be focused on how to respond in the case of violence in the school. If there is a fight in the school, we want to make sure that every staff member knows how to respond, what is the appropriate response, how to de-escalate a situation, because we've found that there is some miscommunication, inconsistency, misunderstanding about what should be the steps to take if there's a situation going on in a building. So those are the immediate bigger pieces of professional learning that we're doing. One is that consensus building about the importance of this work, and the other piece is making sure that everyone knows the standard protocols to respond in a crisis. And that really is just like the foundation to hit us off into the spring and then the future about a sustainable plan moving forward. So that is a pretty quick overview, but I am open to any questions you might have.
Director Karen Klein-Jerome.
On the third group down, the one that involved the community,
Yes.
I didn't see board members listed. And I thought part of what we talked about is being a part of the work on citation groups like we were Return to Learn. Is that something that's going to open up to a board member or two, or?
Absolutely. And I don't, trying to recall, I think actually, Linda, were you at one of the, are you on that community team? I may be.
No.
Okay. Well, yes, definitely we would love to have you, and I can make sure that you are invited to that, because that would be obviously an important component would be having board representation on a community team like that.
Director Hayes.
I was going to, not really a question, as a comment to, I'm glad that it's a consistent, that all the educators are receiving consistent training. Because I've often thought, if you leave and go to a different building, do we handle the escalation the same at each building? So I'm just happy that it's uniform so it can be carried out throughout the district in the same manner. And thank you for your work.
Director Peck.
I'm going to have like 3 questions. So number one, how were the parents and community members chosen for that community group? Because one of the things we've really had trouble with is reaching those people who don't normally have a voice. And so we have a habit of just calling the parent who is always the vocal one, or asking the vocal parent to find somebody for us, and it ends up being the same people every time.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So our first community team meeting took place actually back in February, and that's when we had our partners with the state here with us, and that's the same feedback that we got from that group, is when we said at the end, who else needs to be here, they gave us a lot of names from people that they knew, and so we reached out and expanded that. And as we've moved forward, this team has evolved a little bit to the point that the goal is really to be heavily focused on community. We had it kind of flipped a little bit because we had a lot of staff, Davenport staff, that were interested. And so it was, the majority of it was actually DCSD staff and less community. So I actually, after October's training, I did have to reach out to a few staff, say, I appreciate your support. We're going to need to pull a few people back from that group and add more community and with more parent actually as well. And so we intentionally reached out to parents that were representative in our community. We worked with our equity innovator with a few suggestions for that, as well as we have some students or some families of students with IEPs. So we did try to intentionally include more families of students that were representative of our district.
Okay, and then do we have any students on that group committee?
We don't at the time.
I'm not sure if that would be appropriate or not, but just something to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So my second question is kind of related to Director Klein-Jerome's. If we're delivering this presentation to the entire district,
Yep.
we should also deliver it to us, and not just assume that we're all on board. You can assume that, but when you're talking about consistency, I think that would go a long way, rather than just having board participation in, say, the community committee, which I would love to do, but, and I'm sure a number of us would, but yeah, I don't know how we're going to fit it into our agendas, but having that, at least a presentation on that so that we get some of the same training.
The plan is for the board to be a part of that and make sure that we have consensus among the board as well. And so next Tuesday, that was one of our agenda items for our district team, is say, okay, who hasn't gotten this and how are we going to make sure? And you are all definitely on that list.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my last question is, so when you talk about consistency, what comes to mind is really a flow chart type thing where an objectivity, if this is the action, this is the reaction.
Yep.
And taking out the subjectivity of, I know this student, so I'm going to treat them this way, or I don't know that student, which tends to result in implicit bias, causing us, directing our actions, right? So is this kind of the kind of thing that's being built here is if a student does X, Y, or Z, and I know, it's not possible to cover every single action that could happen, but that way you can say, oh, this happened, doesn't matter who it is, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yep. That is absolutely the conversations that we're having. So there's one piece there with regarding to one specific, it's like violence in schools, as far as what to do. So that's a little bit more sometimes cut and dry as far as if there is a fight in a school, there was a survey that was conducted that 20% of our secondary staff said they don't know what to do. And so we're going to fix that. Before winter break, everyone will know what to do. Now, on some of those other pieces, as far as situations occurring in a classroom, whether they considered a minor or a major, types of referrals, and how that is done consistently, that is definitely going to be addressed also. So tomorrow, one of the pieces that we're going to be embedding into the training is providing a scenario, a K-6 scenario, and a 7 through 12 scenario. Saying here is a pretend thing that could definitely happen. It's probably happened in every building. What would you do? How would you document this? Would it be a major referral or a minor referral, or even would it be a referral, and what kind? Because we need to ensure that from building to building, if we're using data to help us to provide resources to buildings that need more support, we need to make sure that that same data matches at every building, and that's where that consistency piece comes in. So we're going to gather that information tomorrow, and then use it to help provide professional development in the future, so we can achieve what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of many things that we can do to help start to reduce some of that disproportionality is, and I know we're never, it's not going to be perfect, but at least kind of pull a little bit of that out.
Yep.
So thank you.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have anything? President Potts, do you have anything?
No, I do not.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. You said that this training will be going out to all district employees, so everybody that's in any one of our buildings will know what to do, which I think is a great thing. What about like substitutes and stuff? Where do they factor into this? Because I mean, at the rate the COVID numbers are going and stuff like that, and it sounds like we might have more people out than in and stuff. How does all that factor?
Yeah, that's one of our other groups that we are planning on trying to figure that out, because they do need to get this as well. So we have like the in-person, like nothing's really in person, the virtual training that we're doing with all of our leadership, and then they're doing this training with their staff. But we're trying to consider, okay, so maybe we do one live virtual training for all ASC staff, because we want everyone in this building to know also. And if we can't do a live training with someone, then could we do a recorded module type of training where they still at the end of it is that consensus survey to make sure we're all on board with it. So we're exploring all those options. So if guest teachers can't attend in person when we do it virtually, is there some kind of a recorded session we can do? It's not, we'd much rather have it where they're live having those conversations, but they're definitely one of the groups that we're trying to identify.
Okay, and then my other question, how do you keep track of who all has gotten the training and who hasn't? So, I mean, is there like an attendance sheet when you put the class on, so that way you make sure you get everybody?
Yeah, so just before walking into this room, that was the piece I was working on for the training tomorrow, is that we're putting a Google form together that would allow that just says, we do this for a lot of our other trainings in our district, like click on this link, it lets them know their name, their email, and that they attended the training on this day. And that would allow us to pull that information out. We can do it by building, by job title, by those types of pieces. But we definitely have had that discussion as well.
Okay. Does it let you know they logged on and then they hurried up and logged back off or anything like that? Or, I mean, that probably happens. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I've done that a time or two.
Well, again, right now we've only been thinking about the live sessions so that they would probably be within their building group. But you're right, we'd have to. There's always going to be things like that we'll have to be looking into.
Otherwise, I really applaud you. I think this is great work. I like you got your timelines in here. Everybody knows I'm a huge person on strategic plans. You got your stuff laid out. You got your dates, your times, and everything, and who's who and what's what. So I greatly appreciate that. And keep up the great work. And anything we can do, we'll be happy to help. Does anybody have any other questions?
I would just add that I know we're working to get bus drivers, food service. I mean, groups that are kind of outside of the normal staff development. It's been a real challenge. Secretaries. Yep. I mean, there's all those groups need to get this training likewise.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Is Gary Sinclair on the line now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. I was listening. I just didn't know how to get logged in. Can I share my screen is that possible?
I think we can do that.
Yes, you can do that.
We can do that.
I think tell me when you can see the screen or my screen.
Will do.
We could
Okay.
a second ago. We could see you doing something.
Yeah, we could see it for a second, Gary, but it is now gone.
Well, I show to share primary monitor and I'm clicking share. Do I need to ask for control?
They're working on it, Gary.
Okay.
In fairness to Gary, I think we thought this was a Zoom meeting and not a Skype meeting. So
I hear you. I've been asking them forever to go to Zoom, and they tell me we can. I don't know why. It's so much easier.
So Gary, you selected the present button. And
I did, but now it says, so it looks like I need to try to join again. So I will do that. It's got primary screen and I hit share. And I can try the other one.
Yeah, after that, it should prompt you for permission to share.
I am presenting on the secondary, so you can see mine.
Yep, we got it.
Okay.
Gary.
You're there.
Very good. Okay, so what I believe I'm going to be presenting on is primarily on the report we are doing to the SBRC with the focus on a couple specific issues. If it goes too long, somebody turn it off and I will leave, but there's a lot of content we have to talk about. The first document in the presentation is kind of the cover letter. And in the cover letter, we really just talk about why we're going to be there, which is because they ask us to, and when the board actually approved, which is tonight. When the board approves tonight, what I would ask you to do is to approve the information being submitted to the SBRC with minor changes to be reviewed and approved by the president of the board. We've submitted it to the Department of Ed. They're reviewing it. There may be some minor changes. We wouldn't change anything that changes the meaning of it, but it just would be easier for the board. And then we talk about the parts of our presentation. Then we talk about who's going to be there. And right now, we've got the superintendent, the board president, Lisa, and myself. If there's somebody else going to be either virtually or in person, they simply need to be added to that list so we know. And then we've got contact. So the cover letter is really an explanation of what we're presenting. The second document is kind of the heart of the explanation, and it's called the executive summary. And what we do is we simply walk through an explanation of our minutes. Let me, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go somewhat quickly through the attachments, a quick explanation, and then through the attachments of what we are presenting. Please stop me if you have questions. So the way we did this is they ask us to give a status report. This is not a normal SBRC presentation. We're not required to present make a request. So we try to organize this somewhat different, but in a way that tells our story. So we start off by explaining to them that we've added the finance committee. And really what that does, that allows them to understand that the board is doing more things to understand and deal with finance. Now, this is a draft of the finance committee, and eventually the board will be asked to approve this. But we met with the finance committee, we talked about this, we'll probably review at our next meeting and then take it to the board as a whole. But the whole idea is to let the Department of Education know that the Davenport board is doing more. The second documentation is our final fiscal year 20 UAB. They ask us to tell them what's happened since we last met. So what we did is to provide for them our final fiscal year 20 UAB. And that's what this is. This is our final documentation. We actually ended the year at $2,004,000. What I want to point out now, there are a couple items that they only let us count after the fact. One of them is SBRC 1. Anything that's not completed, they really don't let us count. So we actually count part of that afterwards. But what we wanted to do was share with them that in fact we did end fiscal year 20 positive. The biggest change that we made in the district is line item budgeting. We really approached it from a different point of view. We really looked at all revenues based on state and local documentation. Any revenue that we knew was actual, we brought it into the line item budget. We didn't estimate anything we knew. So we started with revenue. And then we started with salaries and benefits. The district developed, after a lot of work, they developed this list. And this is a list of every employee in the district. What is their contract amount? What is their benefits? And what is the line item they're paid for? So really, we put a lot of time into developing the line item, which 84.3% is salaries and benefits. So we generated 84.3% of our line item budget from that list. We then looked at discretionary spending, which we carried over from last year at the same rate. Then we reviewed all categoricals. We looked at state and federal, and we set our categoricals, the revenues and the expenditures, at a level that we knew. And if we didn't know, we made our best professional judgment. Now, our biggest issue last year was miscellaneous revenue. It dropped dramatically. And as we've reviewed, the biggest drop was federal dollars. And we believe that has changed this year. So it's going to be more available and therefore more miscellaneous revenue. We are predicting when we got done, when we did all of this, we instead of looking at the end, we actually went through the process of saying what should our budget be, and we actually have a cover sheet that is the actual cover sheet that we used that looked at all of our different job positions, all of our benefits, all of our categoricals, or excuse me, not categoricals, discretionary. This is our actual form. And then we reviewed all of our state and federal categoricals. When we got done with that, we realized that we were over budget. We didn't start with the end. We went through the process and said, what do we need? And that's where we actually set our budget. When we were done, we were $2.6 million short of having a positive balance. There is no way that we can hit exactly. So what we've done is we have projected and plan on cutting $4,014,652. Now, I believe TJ also gave to you this, which is an explanation of all of the reductions that we've talked about. And you can see it shows about $4,000,005. We won't be able to get all of those. The early retirement will not show as much savings probably as we're projecting. So our line item budget is very extensive. And we've gone through a lot of different looks to try to come up. One is the early retirement that we've talked about, kind of an emergency mid-year type thing. I heard somebody talk earlier, it does focus on teachers, administrators, and non-bargaining, primarily because of the higher salary, and that those positions will not be replaced. That's a very difficult thing, but it is a way for us to identify about $2 million of our needed $4 million cut. And that's why we use those three groups and not other groups. The salaries aren't as high, and frequently those other positions have to be replaced. We met with the Department of Ed today, and they asked that they suggested we added some things. And so the red is language that we've added today that would not have been in your original document. Part of that is that they wanted to know how we talked about reoccurring or one-time expenses. And we avoided one-time expenses. Our reductions are not one-time expenses. They are reoccurring, and that's what our focus has been. So that's a lot of information in a very short time. But my point is we have probably spent more time and more energy in this line item budget development. We believe we have a good idea of what we're going to spend this year. Questions about that?
Director Beck?
Thank you for going through this with us. I'm still a little bit confused as to why if the deficit is 2.6 million, I understand rather than looking at, you kind of flipped the way you looked at the budget and said, here's the money we have and here's how much we're going to spend. And that ended up with negative 2.6 million UAB. I guess I don't understand why it's another 1.4 million for variance. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Here is this is attachment E. And what this is our estimated 21. And that 190 million is our projected spending that includes the 4 million reduction. The problem is we have several variables that we can't match exactly. Okay, we can't know miscellaneous revenue exactly. We can't know spending exactly. So we've got to build in enough of a cushion that we're not going to end up negative. You know, if we do a great job and we're right on, then we're going to have a positive balance to go forward. But what if spending's a little higher than we project? What if miscellaneous revenue? You know I heard the discussion tonight about going more virtual. When we go more virtual, are we going to back off of federal revenues and therefore have less miscellaneous revenue? So really, it's because of those two items, miscellaneous revenue and actual spending, that are variables that we don't know how to predict. This gives us a cushion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did anybody else have anything? Gary, this is Director Gosa. I do want to thank you for the line item budget. That's something I've been asking about for a long, long time, and I'm glad we finally have that. So I do appreciate your time and effort to get that done in the Finance Committee as well. I'm glad we're finally starting to get things done and moving in the right direction. Thank you for all your help.
Thank you. The work in your district has been stellar. There are some, and I can't give you the names, but Lisa or TJ or somebody will, that really did a lot of work to come up with what we have used to drive this. The next reports, which we will do every month. We already did this with the facility or the Finance Committee. This is normally what I'll be on your agenda for the next few months. But normally we'll use Forecast 5. But to use Forecast 5, we have to have the line item budget done, which we do have done, and we did get submitted. And in fact, Forecast 5 turned it around very quickly. I was informed today that it's online and we're ready to start using it. But we didn't have that to prepare for this meeting or the SPRC. So what we had to do was to develop some of our own. And really, you have, this is the document that is in your work information. And really, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure the board had 3 pieces of information. Is where are we as of the end of September? How much have we spent? Okay. Also, how much of that budget do we expect that to be? So at the end of September, we had spent $29,139,000. That is 15.33% of the total we expect to spend. So where are we today? Where do we think we're going to end the year? What percent are we using? And how does that compare to the last 4 years? That's what this does. This tells you those 3 things. Now, what we've been able to do since we met with the facility, or the Finance Committee, is we've been able to do October. So this is actually the same report, but for October. So for October's expenses, we are actually at 48.7. That is 25% of our total budget. And it's slightly less than where we have been the last 4 years. This is information the board should get and ask for every month. Now, we're going to do them in the future in a different format, but this is what board members need to know. If this number was 40%, board members should be saying, wait a minute, we're way over where we've been in the past. Why is that? I would tell you we're a little lower, and as the year trends on, we'll look more at that. But somebody did ask, and I did it on both reports. Well, I'm just going to focus on October. If I go down to expenditures, at the bottom, I added the biggest differences. Our transportation is down $355,000. TSS is down. Non-categorical for teachers. So what I tried to do was to give you some sense of what that is. We'll do more of that with 5CAS in the future because it drills down a lot more. So I'm going to stay on October's report. They're the exact same report, one the end of September, one the end of October. The next thing board members should know every month is revenue. Where are we this month? So at the end of October, we had taken in $53,331,000. That is 27.36% of our projected revenue. Okay? And you compare that to prior years, we are right on target. We're right where we would expect to be compared to other years. What Forecast 5 will bring to the table is not only does it look at where we're at this month, but it will consider our trend amounts for the months that we haven't done to give us an idea where we're going to end the year. So Forecast 5 will add a lot to this report. The third measure for the board is our unspent balance. We have spent $48,700,000. How much of our spending authority is that? We expect to be able to spend $191 million. That is 25% of that amount. When we look at where we were at the same time the prior 4 years, we're running a little lower. That's where we should be. That's where we want to be this year. Again, you've got 2 months, October and September. And the last piece is, where do we think we're going to end the year? Again, we expect our expenditures to be at $190 million. We expect our unspent balance to be $1.6 million. That's still pretty tight. We want to have more cushion. We just can't do it reasonably this year. These 4 measures are measures we will report on, plus more detail every month. When board members say, what do I need to know? What do I need to be asking about? This is it. This will tell you where we are. This is what I'll report on with Lisa every month for the next several months. And this is the same data that you would have received in your packet that went through September. Any questions?
Director Beck?
Thank you so much for that. That's really, really helpful. And I remember when you first presented the idea of Forecast 5 to us, what was it, 2 years ago, last year? I don't even remember. That's what I was expecting. And it makes so much sense. Do have a quick question. So, given that we're in a weird year, is it fair to compare our numbers with typical years, right? Because we've got all of this pandemic stuff going on. So our expenditures are different, our savings are different. We've got savings that we wouldn't normally see, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm guessing you guys have some way of accounting for that, but I don't know what it is. So is it fair to do that, or do we just go with the numbers we get and try and deal with it?
That's a good question, but it's really difficult. Through this year, we probably are pretty typical. But as the year progresses and things change, yes, it will have a tremendous impact on us. And we're going to have to try to measure that, just like we did at the end of last year. Our miscellaneous revenue tanked. And it was after the fact that we're able to analyze a lot of what occurred. Our substitute teachers fell $1.2 million because we were in school. So we're aware of it. We will try to show you how we measure it. But as sad as it is, a lot of it will be after it happens to us.
Okay,
Not
and
a
then
good answer, no.
I was just going to say that answers that. I was just going to ask, so the goal here is that we catch differences now so that we can make adjustments, so at the end of the fiscal year, we're on target, right?
Yes. Our hope is, or our expectation is, the way Forecast 5 works, is it will take into account the actual year to date, and then it will project for the rest of the year. We hope to be able to analyze that and say, look what's happening. This is running higher than we had anticipated, or this is running lower. So we try to make adjustments as the year goes along. Yes.
Does anyone else have any questions? I'll kind of ask one along those lines. This is Director Gosa again. So I like the way that you presented this, and then you gave us like what we are running a little more on. So I'm assuming every month we'll be able to see if we're a little high spending in a certain area versus other months, and then we can kind of trend that after we get a couple years under our belt doing that. Because I'm sure there will be some months where there's a little more spending than other months and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that's what this is set up for, and then we will get that report every month so we can kind of keep a handle on that. Is that correct?
It is. It is, absolutely. And let me give you a good example. Bill Decker actually, I think, answered this for me. But when I saw this September, the revenues, this kind of alarmed me, how low it was. And when I look at the breakdown, property tax was down 2.9 million. Now, property tax varies from month to month, year to year. But my question was, are people not paying their property tax? I think Bill pointed out to me that there was a delay, so people just paid later. And so when we look at the next month, you can see that in fact the expenditures pick back up, that in fact they did pay property tax. But what it does, it allows us to identify where we're high, where we're low, talk about why that might be, and then look at the trend. At some point it becomes a trend, you got to do something about it.
That's exactly my point. I appreciate it, Gary. Thank you so much. Is there any other questions? No other questions.
Okay. One thing that the department asked me to comment on that I think it's worthwhile for the board is when we met with the state board and even the SBRC, there was some concern about the board report, the monthly Forecast 5 report for April, May, and June. April showed that we were going to be a negative 1.3 million. May showed we were going to be a positive 20 million, and June showed a positive 97,000. What happened was April and June were good reports, because what happened in April was we saw we're going to be negative, and Claudia and the superintendent wisely took an additional insurance holiday. So that's why we went from a negative 1.3 to a positive 97. But what happened in May is there was a problem with the upload, and it showed spending instead of being 185 million as 168 million. So there was just bad data in May. It wasn't that the district made a poor decision. or had analyzed the data wrong. It was just bad data. The next thing that I wanted to look at was our actual projection for this year. And we looked at it a little bit earlier. This is it right here. So you can see this is where we're going to end on July 1 of 21. Everything in white is a known number. Everything in blue is an estimate. The only thing that we are allowed to estimate right now is miscellaneous revenue and expenditures. We are going to have what we think is a special ed deficit. And we will actually eventually request some, but we can't do it now. You can't enter anything that's going to be an estimate there. We also think we'll have some SBRC 1, which we believe is going to be COVID-related expenses. And it's going to be my recommendation that we apply to the SBRC for any additional cost of implementing the state board's guidelines, the additional cost of the interim superintendent, the additional support from the AA, and my support. I'm going to suggest to the board that we request additional authority. We'll still have to come up with the money, but it is an unusual expense. So all of that we'll eventually request. It's not there now because the SBRC doesn't want us to have that. Our projection to them has to be without those items included. That's why we show spending $190 million and having a $1.6 million unspent balance. So this is our official form to the SBRC. Later on, I will show you what I think is going to be our official form, all things done next September or October. Okay? Special ed, and actually the state DE asked me to ask the district to present some information to the SBRC on special ed deficit because it is so different than the past. I'm going to go to that to show you the difference and then talk about why. The form that you're looking at is a form developed by Iowa Association of School Boards, and they do a great job. This is a summary of the form. Now, actual 18 that's actual, 19 is actual, and 20 is actual. 21 is what we are projecting. And what happens is at the end of last year, we had a positive balance. We carried over 471,000. Right now, with the support of your special ed staff, we are projecting a deficit of 9 million. That is a gigantic swing. Now, I will tell you to start with, special ed seldom negatively impacts your unspent balance. Because what happens when we overspend special ed, we ask for the additional authority. So in the end, we will ask for that 9 million in additional authority. It's not like reducing a special ed deficit is going to save us part of that $4 million. Because if we reduce the deficit to 8,011,000, which we should if we can, it will reduce what we ask for additional authority by that million. Now, if we talk a little bit about the why. Okay, when we count students, which we do every November, when we counted students last year, compared to the year before, we lost $2.7 million. We had 161 fewer kids. In addition, we think we're going to lose Medicaid dollars of about $526,000. Part of that is because we're doing more virtual support that we can't claim. Plus, we believe we're probably doing a better job of what we should claim. In reality, when we look at this, we are projecting our revenue source in special ed to be $3,267,000 than the year before. Automatically, we would, all other things being equal, we would expect the deficit to be $3 million. Where we really come into issues is the change in salaries and benefits. This shows salaries going up 2.6, and it shows benefits going up 2.3. Those two items are along with the decrease in our major revenue source, are the major reasons. That's why we end up with a deficit of $9,100,000. Now, I want to be clear with the board that although this doesn't impact unspent balance, it is dramatic, the impact on property tax. Because eventually, in fiscal year 23, we will have to try to make up part of those dollars. So we're really going to have to balance our property tax asking between cash, between management, and between special ed deficit. Now, if I go back, and I'll ask for questions, but what I tried to do is to explain to the DE, and more importantly to the board, why this is occurring. This information is provided by your special ed team. And what this does, this identifies what they see as the reasons for the big increase in spending. 20 positions were added for student support positions, 4 special ed facilitators, and 12 open special ed parents. Those are things that were added, plus probably some others that were open that we added spring or summer. That's part of the reason that it's so high. As I say down here, we won't know this until next August or September. So we won't have the ability to put the cash on fiscal year 22. It'll impact our property tax in 23. We continue to look at ways to reduce this deficit. It's the goal to reduce the deficit, but right now, I pretty much have to use what the special ed team, they understand your district. They know your district better than I do. That's what we have to follow. Let me see if I can find so if I go back to, this is the deficit. So now I'm going to stop and ask if there's any questions, because this is a very, very big change for the district.
Anybody got any questions?
I do, but I need just a sec.
Director Beck, in a second.
Go ahead if somebody else has one.
The floor is yours.
Hi. Okay, Gary. So we're bringing in less because we have fewer students in the buildings due to COVID, correct?
Fewer kids in special ed.
So
these are the number of kids. Last year, when we counted special ed kids, we had 2,606. No, I'm sorry. In 18, because it's a year behind. In 18, we had 2,616 kids. Last year, 19 when we counted, we had 2,454.
Okay, so just a fewer number of kids in special ed. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're not in the school buildings 100% of the time right now.
It does not have anything to do with COVID. Both of these would have occurred before COVID.
Okay,
The count would have occurred in November of 19.
okay. So I get that. We have fewer students who are in special education services. Now, I know we had quite a bit of spending related to the citations from the Phase 2 audit, right? And so
That is what I'm told. Is Sandy at the meeting?
yeah, she's here.
She is a lot more knowledgeable about this if she doesn't mind stepping in.
So we had increased expenditures because we had to provide compensatory ed, and we had to reconvene all those IEP meetings, and we had people working over the summer, so people got stipends or extra money. So that makes sense to me. Have we adjusted back then from that, or are we still at those levels of staffing?
No, it wasn't a matter of adding staff to do that. It was a matter of paying people off contract time to do it.
Okay. So, but paying all the people from the AEA who were involved in that as well, they weren't technically added as staff. They were just being paid.
Through a contract with the AEA, but then we also had to pay district staff from other districts where the students had relocated, and transportation for students, and so it was, it's a little more than just paying people for their time.
Okay. So if that significant amount is related to the compensatory ed, can we reasonably expect not to see the same giant amount next year?
Giant amount for compensatory education?
Yes.
Yes, that goes down every year, and hopefully we will get out of that business. But the lion's share, I believe, is over, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Decker, you looked like you had something you wanted to add.
I was going to give a little clarification that this was not money that went to the AEA. I was just going to make sure that everybody understood it was staff that the AEA carried a contract because staffing wasn't available in Davenport. So
right,
it was a matter of being able to pay people more.
Right,
it went through a contract.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to make sure I understand is that a lot of this has to do with citations, and we would not expect this level of spending for the foreseeable future, to continue for the foreseeable future necessarily.
Not for compensatory education, but if you remember a month or so ago when I and several others presented to you the story of special education, and you remember the one slide in particular that had the slant, the decrease in funds is due to correcting the over-identification, the putting kids into restrictive placements, and so your weighted dollars are 2 years behind. And so it's catching up to us now, basically.
Okay, that makes sense. So the fewer services we're providing, the less money we're going to get to provide those services, basically.
Well, it's not fewer services. It's a matter of, remember when we talked about how the lion's share of your kids with special education should be in general education?
Oh, yeah.
And a fewer should be in that middle category, and then very few should be in the most restrictive settings. We were exactly opposite that.
Okay.
Where you get a portion of dollars depending on what setting a student's in. You get more dollars if they're in that very restrictive setting.
Right.
And so that, since we have now corrected that as far as making sure that kids are in the least restrictive environment, but yet the most appropriate environment, it's now impacting our dollars.
That makes sense. And I think that's what I was trying to say, but I did not do so articulately.
No, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Dr. Beck, if I might add, if you look up at the screen under expenditures, there's a, oh, Gary, don't change it in the middle. if you look at where it says L2, L3, L1, I mean, level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yeah.
And if you can see back in the FY18 year, it actually went up to, from 18 to 19, it went up to 1728.
Oh, yeah.
From that point of 1728 being high, it has then dropped to 16 and then to 13. And so that is a significant amount of drop for the most significant number as far as generating revenue up there. And so, you know, that's a combination of what you were asking and what Dr. Schmidt was talking about in putting those two together to see the numbers really do make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I feel bad we're not asking more questions, Gary, but I mean, you're describing everything as we go, so I appreciate you holding our hand walking through. Director Beck has another question.
Sorry, and this might be one for Dr. Schmitz. So I also noticed in the increase, so we can't claim Medicaid because things are virtual. The filling open vacancies for early childhood special education paras and for student support liaisons, wouldn't we need to do that anyway?
Yes, at the early childhood level, we did. If you remember, adding the SSLs, the student support liaisons, came as a result of the concerns about moving students who had been previously placed at Keystone into typical buildings.
Okay.
And so there needed to be some assurances that that was going to be done well. And so that was the additional folks for that.
Okay, and so it's 20 student support positions, that's correct? It says 20 on this document, but I thought you'd said something different. Okay. And so will those continue then, now that students have transitioned away from Keystone into other buildings? I would imagine we still need some, but are those going to continue at the same level, or do we reduce those numbers a little bit?
That would need to be a conversation that would need to be had about where appropriate cuts need to be made.
Okay.
There haven't been any final decisions about any of that, to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think there are any other questions, Gary.
Okay. So then we move into our 5-year project. Yeah.
Could I get you to back up to the special ed sheet?
The finance sheet?
Yes.
Yes.
I do think it's important that, let's see. Can you go down a little bit? Yeah, there we go. If you just go down just a little bit, or up, however you look at it. So if you look at the salaries and benefits, if you see where Gary has that over in the red, where it's 2.6 and 2.3, those are numbers that are very important for the board to understand and make sure that we as a district are monitoring that. We can control some of that, and some of it we can't. With an IEP team puts together a plan, that has to be filled, and so that part can't be controlled. But there are other parts of how do we support students in general that can be monitored. And so, you wouldn't want to look at this and say, it's special ed, it's entirely, doesn't affect our unspent balance, and so we don't necessarily have to pay attention to it. It does affect your tax rate. You do have to make choices between the management fund and cash reserve levy and special ed deficit to keep your tax rate acceptable to your public, and those are two items that do need to be on your radar.
Okay, thank you.
The next area, we're actually going to move into our 5-year projection, okay? And really, this needs more time with your administration. But essentially what we did, we used ISVs. and they do a great job with this tool. Forecast 5, once it's up and running, will give us more detail. But what we did is we went through the key assumptions. What do we think is going to happen to supplemental state aid? We know that we lost almost 500 kids this fall. We believe they will be back over the next 2 years. So we add some to that going forward. But then we start a reduction of 50 a year. All of the other enrollments are tied to that percent. But essentially what we do is we go through all the variables that will drive unspent balance. Now you can see here for special ed, we expect that deficit to come down. And we would like for it to come down more, but we don't know how much or how quickly. Miscellaneous income. Miscellaneous income, you can see, was 22.7 in 19, and it fell primarily due to federal dollars. We're projecting it to jump again in 21, and again, primarily federal dollars. So what we can do is we actually show what we're projecting for all the variables. Okay? When that's done, we actually then go to our unspent balance and we look at the projection. Oh, wrong one. And this is it. This is what we are projecting for Davenport going forward. Now, I do want to point out that next year, fiscal year 22, we've got a very big budget guarantee. Now, the biggest, I mean, it's great to get it, but the budget guarantee is paid 100% out of property tax. So there's going to be a strain on property tax. Most of this is almost known already because we're getting counts in. So this is the exact same form. Where it starts to vary is here. You can see that I have put in the mix some things that weren't on the other sheet. I've put in some other things that we didn't include in the fiscal year 21. Right here. I did not have that 1.6 million, and I didn't have the special ed deficit because they won't let us include that. And quite frankly, it's because it's an estimate. We don't know it's going to happen. So we put it in our projection model, but we can't put it in our individual year. So those things do change. Those have been added that are not in the other model. In the end, we think that we could get to an unspent balance of about 11 million by the end of this year. Now that is 5.5%. I don't know if there's a board policy, but boards typically have a policy and frequently will target 10%. You can see that going out, we have an unspent balance between 5 to 7, 7.8 to 7.5. It's my recommendation that the board be more concerned about the leveling of unspent balance than the level of. It doesn't have to be 20%. 7% is within the range and is acceptable as long as we make changes when changes occur. If we end up next year showing a very large declining enrollment, we have to respond to that immediately, not let this fall to 3.1. And then it's hard to make up. This level, in my opinion, is acceptable as long as we maintain that kind of level and respond. Unspent balance jumps a lot at the end of this year if our numbers are correct. Well, I don't want to do that. If we're right, if we have a $9 million deficit, this 1.6 million includes $500,000 that is partially COVID spending and partially the additional cost for the state board's compliance issues with Davenport. So we've added some dollars in there to cover that authority. So this is our projection model going forward. Somebody would say it's not high enough. If that's the case, then spend less, cut more. Any questions about this?
Director Hayes.
Gary, I missed you on one spot here. This is Director Hayes. Could you go over that part again, that we should be more concerned with the level, not the leveling? Is that what you said?
No, my feeling, and this is my personal feeling, that we should be more concerned about the leveling of and not the level of. This doesn't have to be 20%. Because I'll tell you, across the state, 20% is not atypical. But I don't think we have to build to 20%. 7%, our average in those 5 years is 7.5. That's fine. We don't have to continue to build that to 20, 25, or even 15%. So again, that's got to be the board's call. If the board says we want this at a minimum of 10%, then not simply, either generate more authority or spend less. Those are the two pieces of the equation. I don't think it's necessary. As long as the district responds to a change in our assumptions. The best example is right here. If we had another drop of 470 kids for fiscal year 23, we need to cut spending because we're going to have less authority. We need to spend less. In the end, as this combs out, the board has to decide, and Lisa probably can tell us, or we can look, is there already a board policy that sets our unspent balance ratio?
I can tell you, this is Director Beck, there is not a policy that does that.
Okay.
But I'm in charge of the policy committee, so we'll make one.
I think we do want one. And the board can then discuss, do we want to set it at a level, or is the leveling? In this case, to me, saying it's got to be between 5 and 10 or 6 and 9, I think to me, because as we spend more, our unspent balance dollars are going up anyway. Why have $11 million? Part of it is to adjust for a situation we don't expect. Supplemental state aid is at 0 for a year. What do we do about that? This is to give us some cushion. This is to give us some time to adjust. Any other questions?
Gary, just a couple comments. The ability to adjust, we're about a decade out from when there was a 10% across the board cut in state aid. And if you have a 10% across the board cut in state aid and your level is too low, then you go from maybe something that might seem workable to something that would be negative very quickly. So that's the kind of environment that Gary's talking about. You've got to decide on what level you need to prepare for unknowns like that. The other piece I would like to just talk about when Gary talks about spending less or cutting spending, I think most of us jump right away to that means we have to give something up. But in a district the size of Davenport, it can just mean getting more efficient. And you know, if you have a scenario in which you have 4 sections of a grade level and there's 15 kids in each class, and you can turn that into 3 sections with 20 kids in each class, you're still serving kids, you're still getting great instruction in your classroom and in a way that isn't treating anyone poorly, and yet you just saved a teaching salary. And when you do that across the board in a district this size, you can get a lot more efficient. And you know, that's a mindset that I think you have to get into as well, that driving efficiency is a way to make your budget work, in addition to the idea that you always have to give something up. You know, you don't want to give up the arts. You don't want to give up extracurriculars. You don't want to give up services to kids, especially if you're not running other parts of your district in an efficient way. So I would encourage you, drive efficiency.
Mr. Vice President?
Yes, President Potts.
I have a question now. So if you have an unspent balance at the end of the year of $11 million, what happens to that money when you start your next fiscal year?
Okay, and again, just a matter, this is authority. This is not money. This is authority to spend. This $9 million that we're projecting for a deficit has no money with it. We use the money we have. But what you can see is we end here at, you can see this $11,035,000. It is carried over to the next year. So whenever we eat, what's that?
It's not carried over as increased spending authority.
It is. It allows we start the next year with $11 million in authority. Look at these two numbers. And this year, we're projecting to be at $201 million in authority. Next year, we're projected to be at $210 million. That difference is because we carry over that $11 million.
So you can bank unspent authority.
You carry it over to the next year. Yes.
So then does it accumulate year after year?
It does. You can see here, this 15 goes to there. Every year it carries over. Yes. But that's part of the reason we can increase spending by about $4 million a year.
Regardless of what we get for what used to be allowable growth.
Yes.
Okay, that answers a question I had because I was wondering about that. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Decker, I have a question for you. So is it safe for the board to get information on like how many students are in a classroom and kind of look at that stuff for the efficiency part you were talking about? Would that be something that should be readily available to the board, or do we need to make like a board request on that, or that should be something? What's the best way for us to keep that on our radar to make sure that we're being efficient and effective?
Sure. I mean, I've heard that request was made, I think, a couple months ago by Dr. Beck. I don't know that in the current environment, I can answer the question compared to the optimal environment. And the optimal environment is that your administrative team knows that. Not so much that you can ask the question, they're going to know off the top of their head, but that should be a part of the budget process on an annual basis. When you're deciding, when Gary Sinclair said you have to adjust immediately, you're going to know your numbers in October for the you now know what your funding is for the following year. and you have to use those numbers to make decisions leading into the budget. And then that should be described to you as a board as a part of the budget process. And I think you're going to see a very different budget process this year than you've ever seen before as you move from what it was to that optimal environment. One of the things that Gary Sinclair talked about with Karen and Kent in the board finance is that he used to take a day during Christmas break as a superintendent where he would just set it aside and he would work through those kinds of issues, and then after that he would be ready to communicate that. There's a time for it, so like this time of the year, given what's going on, probably a little early for that board request to happen, but that will happen this year. I mean, between Gary, TJ, and myself, that will happen. So you're going to get that kind of information.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add this, if it's all right, the district has access to phenomenal data that we are going to start. These two slides that you see, we presented to the Finance Committee. And what this does, this shows that the spending per student was $12,552,000 compared to the average of the 15 largest districts in the state of $11,729,000. But we're going to start to present every month to the Finance Committee and then to the board exactly what you're talking about. How many kids do we have? We looked at, this is a staffing ratio of special ed. How many staff do we have? How many kids per staff? So to answer your question, we will start presenting that information.
Thank you.
In your packet, the state board or the SBRC asked that we comment on the progress on a permanent CFO. Is that something you want to talk about now, Bill, or?
Sure, I can talk about that. So one of the things with our conversations with the Department of Ed and with Gary and myself, it's one of the items that had to be taken care of that I said I would take the lead on. I have talked to dozens of people in this search, and the situation I think is a little daunting for people to think about coming in to an environment where the department is so involved. I will tell you, my message has been this is actually an awesome opportunity for someone to come in, because it's one where people can make progress and have phenomenal support. The department has been absolutely wonderful to work with, given great guidance. Gary Sinclair would be the best resource anybody could ever have in coming into a new district. And so I think it's a great opportunity. So we are at the point now where in combing through for new applicants, we didn't have a whole lot of luck. But in looking at the applicants that had previously applied to the district, and frankly, I will tell you, I'm not privy to, I don't know why the search that was done earlier in the year was dropped, but there were very, very qualified candidates that applied. Of the top 3 that were identified, 2 of those people have not indicated any interest into continuing the search. However, one extremely qualified candidate has indicated that they would like to be included, and that is a person that has a SBO authorization right now and has previous experience at the 4A school level in Iowa. The other candidate that has been identified is someone out of the private sector, but comes extremely highly recommended, and kind of anxious to get that process going here. I do think there has to be some more conversation between our group and the Department of Ed to understand how that decision is going to be made, because the dynamics have changed over time. When this started, this was looking for an interim CFO position for 6 months. There was absolutely no interest in that whatsoever. we are so fortunate that Gary was willing to step up and do what he has done. And you've seen tonight just the incredible information that he has put together to communicate. And he has said he's had awesome support here in this district. But because there was no interest in that interim position, the idea of the only way to get somebody in here was to start to look more towards a permanent scenario. And we will have to have a conversation about how is the department and the local board involved in making that decision. But I am pleased to report that we do have 2 very strong candidates, and now I'm working to maybe fill a 3rd spot as a semifinalist. And if we find a quality person, we'll have 3. If we don't find a quality candidate, then we'll have 2 semifinalists.
I have a question on that. So way back when, Hazard, Young, and Atia did a search for the super and the pre whatever. And I know I was told there wasn't any candidates out there. But now I'm hearing that there was a few, so I guess I would like to know what is the board's process of holding someone accountable, why that wasn't done, and why those people were not brought in, because obviously that was a position we needed to get taken care of, and someone dropped the ball somewhere. I hope I'm saying all that.
Well, I mean, I can. Well, okay. Do you have a specific?
I just want to ask a clarifying question. So, can we put a date on when these searches happen? So, what are you talking about? When? Way back when?
When we approved for Hazard, Young, and Atia to put the search out for a CF.
For Claudia's replacement.
Yep.
Okay. Is that?
So, I don't know the dates. I haven't been here. It appears to me that there was maybe an internal search that happened, and there were 3 candidates that I got their resume forwarded to me through HR here in the district. And so it appears there was one internal search.
Okay.
And then it appears to me that there was another search done by HYA.
Yeah.
And it would not be correct to say that they didn't have any candidates. They did not have an SBO candidate. And
They didn't have what?
a school business official licensed candidate. They actually had a fairly long list of candidates from different parts of the country and some from Iowa in private enterprise. But the original charge, and this was, I can attest to this, the original charge was given to me to let's find an Iowa person with a school business official authorization so that somebody can hit the ground running, and we don't have an issue where somebody's good but it takes them a couple years to get going. So I can attest that was the charge given to me as well. But those people are very few and far between that are. There's an association called the Iowa Association of School Board Officials, IASBO, and I have spent hours and hours talking to them about candidates across the state. And so to find people that have the ability and the desire to move from their current community, they're just not out there. And it was indicated to me that IASBO has been having conversations about the position in Davenport since probably early spring. They were very aware of it. When I called to talk to them, I was expecting to have to explain the situation to them, and no, they kind of explained the situation more to me. But it has been a very time-consuming issue, and it's been one that I don't know that I really have the answer to your question, Dan, because I don't think HYA could just manufacture Iowa SBO candidates, and that's what they were looking for. They did produce a very long list of candidates, but it wasn't what they were told we were looking for at the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gary, I don't know if you have more. There's one issue that I don't think we have touched on that I think is
Well, the only thing I've got is the interaction with they asked us to comment on the interaction with the state board. And so that was included in your packet. The only change we've made is the district actually meets with the DE twice a week. So that's the full packet. So Bill, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'd like you to, if you can, put up the chart that you and I were talking about that was actually in front of SBRC earlier in the spring.
This was presented to the SBRC in March of 20. This is what the district said that they needed to do to be financially solvent for 21. Today I worked on that, and that is a reduction of $5,132,000. I am confident that Dr. Kobeski and others made some reductions, but I don't think all of them were done. And I cannot give a clear perception of what it was, other than if all of these would have been made, the reduction of $4 million that we're talking about now probably would not have been needed, or as much wouldn't be needed. Also, I think it's important to point out that if our enrollment continues to decline, which we project that it will, we're going to have to make some other cuts in the future. So I think this is the one that Bill was talking about.
Yes, it is. And I think that it's really important for the board to understand where we're at is somewhat of a trust issue, as much as it is a financial issue. We talked about this with the finance committee, that if we cut this $4 million and the special ed deficit improves through some parts of it through the fact that we don't have to continue some of those actions, but probably equal and maybe even more parts of actual decisions that have been made that we've got to figure out how to turn those around and teach kids effectively in different ways. If those two things get right, then the adjustments after that are really enrollment dependent. But that does not affect the trust issue. And so this was a chart that was put in front of SBRC. And SBRC went way out on a limb. Way out on a limb. I don't know that if the district went back to SBRC and had to do it again, that the same result would happen. They took a chance on the district with the forgiving $9 million of deficit unspent balance. And they know that they took a chance, and they've gotten a lot of heat. They've gotten a lot of criticism for doing that. And so then when you put that in place, along with this, I couldn't make it through a whole meeting without doing that, sorry. When you put this chart that was in front of SBRC, that was kind of like, here's the yin and here's the yang. We're going to do something that hasn't been done before, and we're willing to take the heat for you. But you need to do this to get the rest of the job done. And as Gary said, neither one of us were in the district. We can't go back and run the replay to figure out what was going on. It's hard to figure out exactly what pieces of that may or may not have been done. All we know is the result is certainly not that $5.1 million was cut, as was promised to SBRC. And that's where that lack of trust that you may be feeling coming back at you as a board right now from SBRC, that's where that's coming from. And so that's the $4 million cut. You might look at those numbers and say, oh, we're cutting $1.6 million too much. SBRC is going to look at that and say you're cutting $1.1 million too little. That's what you promised us. You were going to cut 5.1. And So Gary has done an incredible job of being ready to communicate a new plan. But if you put yourself in SBRC's position, they already had a plan communicated to them. How do they know that we're now ready to do something that we promised them before we would do, but we didn't do? And that's really where it's at. And frankly, the district has to come through. The comment was made to me that there is no guarantee that SBRC has to stick with that $9 million forgiving, that they could actually go back on that forgiving of those dollars because the district didn't uphold their part of it. So it is very important to follow through on that next step and show SBRC that for whatever reasons, lack of information or lack of follow through or not a complete picture of what needed to be done, I don't know what the reason is. But whatever the reason is, that's in the past, and we're now going to follow through exactly the way we tell you that we're going to follow through. So that, I hope that explains a little bit of why you may feel that it's coming back to you in a different way that you perceive it. And I'd certainly take questions, but I hope that's helpful.
I think it's very helpful because I now have a trust issue, because when we set the budget last March, we were told this was going to happen. And so apparently there's no checks and balances for us to know this wasn't fulfilled. How do we keep that from ever happening again? Is there no way to go back and figure out, okay, is this really how it played out? Or
So
I don't want to see it happen again.
So Gary gave you 4 numbers to look at every month in this first meeting. I think Gary is going to continue to talk about other tools and checks that you can take a look at. And so frankly, this would probably need to be something that you would directly follow. If this were to happen now, and it is, we're saying there's going to be $4 million cut, then we should be giving you a report on that $4 million and how it's playing out. Gary has already told you that those are estimates, and he does not believe, and I agree with that every one of those is not going to come out exactly that way. When you put it out for early retirement, you don't get to pick who early retires and who doesn't. You can get a lot of savings if you can eliminate a position through attrition. But there are also positions that you would never think about eliminating. That they are positions that are absolutely essential to the operation of the district and to kids being successful. And so you don't know what amount you will save, but you need to know that. You need to know why did this position get filled and that one didn't. So tracking this major of an item actually directly is where you would need to go. If this item was on the agenda in March, this item should have been on the agenda in April and May and June. And that's not to be critical of anybody sitting at the table. That's the job that Gary needs to fulfill in giving you that information and to make sure that the district is following up this year. And it's the job that your future CFO will need to put in front of you regularly.
What we need to do is, when we're in the budgeting process next March, April, May, June, is if we decide to make some, let's say we're going to cut 30 teachers, we need to give to the board a listing of those. We just need to have a list of who is currently employed, who's going to leave through attrition, who we're going to have to cut, whatever that might be. So the board needs and deserves a listing of all of those that we said would occur. That's how we make sure it happens. I really appreciate you hanging in there. This is a long time. It's critical information. Later in the meeting, you're going to be asked to approve the application or the the information to the SBRC. We're really not making an application this time. But tonight, I showed you the changes that the DE suggested. I made them in red. And there may be some minor changes yet this week. Again, if you can, I would recommend that you approve the data be presented to the SBRC with minor changes to be approved by the board president. I still think the board needs to have final input, final say, even if they're minor changes. That's all I've got. Any questions?
Director Beck.
Yeah, so this may be for Mr. Decker more so than Mr. Sinclair, I'm not sure. So we passed that in March, and that's about the time that COVID hit. So I know at least a couple of the things that we were planning to do didn't happen because we had no idea how to handle, this unforeseen circumstance, and we needed all hands on deck. So, I guess my question is, what consideration do we have for that type of situation, right? And I get it. Not all of the things that we said, I'm looking at the positions that we said we would cut. We still could have probably made adjustments and followed through on some of those. But I guess my other question was, some of those ended up being needed because we ended up having this unforeseen situation and transitioning to these hybrid models and remote learning. And so I guess my question would be, what kind of consideration would we get for that type of thing?
Well, not being a member of SBRC, I don't know that I can answer your question. I will say I don't think there are probably two things that are of higher priority than almost anything else that a school district can face. One's a citation from the Department of Education, and another one is an action by SBRC.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make a promise to SBRC, then that has to be your highest priority. If you are cited by the DE, that has to be your highest priority. And I know that, it's a pandemic. It's something that doesn't happen. Has never happened probably in anybody's lifetime. And it's a tough deal, but I don't think that I would approach that in that way. I would approach that to say, you said this was going to happen. It's financial, and you've got to find a way to work through that, even though you had those other issues going on. I know that's difficult. I think that's a difficult answer, but anything else would require SBRC to really step out of line again. And they already did that one time. They stepped away from their norm once already. And so to say, well, we're going to forgive this, now we're going to forgive this too. The criticism they will face from other districts that didn't amass the $9 million deficit and that did take action even during the middle of pandemic would be it'd put them in a very tough position. So although I don't know the answer exactly, those are my thoughts on it. I think those are the two highest priorities that I think a district can face.
Well, and I appreciate that. I wasn't looking for excuses. I was just curious as to how that factors in. But thank you.
Does anybody else have anything? I will just say I agree with you. I'm not looking at giving them any excuses for anything. We said we were going to do something. It didn't get done. I hounded about things for a long time that didn't get done, and now they're starting to get done. I'm glad that we're starting to go in the right direction, but and especially with our finance committee, with Kent and Karen being directly involved with stuff, I think that they'll be the advocates for the board. Kent's a huge stickler on finances, so I think we should be heading in the right direction. We got to do what we got to do. They forgave that, and we told them we were going to do something, and we didn't. The citations, we didn't. And now everybody else has to atone for that while other people don't have to, which isn't right by any means, and I'm going to leave that alone. But if anybody has anything else, otherwise we will move on to items requiring action. Can I get...
Do you want to dismiss?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much, Gary. We appreciate it. Awesome presentation as always. Let's see. Item 901, approval of SBRC application for modified supplemental amount for open enrolled out students. Can I get a motion on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Director Poston.
recommend the board approve application to the School Budget Review Committee for $795,328, the maximum amount, in modified supplemental amount for open enrolled out students not on the previous year's certified enrollment for whom the district will pay tuition in the current budget year.
Second.
Second, Director Klein, Jerome. Is there any discussion? Director Potts, you got anything?
Nope.
Seeing and hearing none, I will call for the vote. Director Poston?
Yes.
Director Klein, Jerome?
Yes.
Director Beck?
Yes.
Director Potts?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Can I get a motion on 902?
Mr. President,
Director Beck?
I recommend that the board approve the application to the School Budget Review Committee for $196,921.12, or the maximum amount in modified supplemental amount for LEP instruction beyond 5 years.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director Hayes, is there any discussion? Director Potts?
Nope.
Seeing and hearing none, I will move on to the vote. Director Beck?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
Director Poston?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director Klein, Jerome?
Yes.
Director Potts?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Item 903. Can I have a motion on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Director Poston.
I recommend the board approve the SBRC application as presented with any minor changes that are deemed necessary.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director Hayes. Is there any discussion? Director Beck.
I would like to make a motion.
Wow. Good idea. Everybody's awake now.
I would like to make a motion that we move this item to after 9.04, because it is in some ways contingent on 9.04.
Okay, so you want to do 904 first and then 903 is what you're getting at?
Yes.
So you want to table 903 till after 904?
Yes.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second by Director Snyder. Is there any discussion?
Why?
Because if we were to, for some reason, change the item 9.04 significantly, it would affect what we are applying for to the SBRC.
Okay.
Is there anybody else got anything? So the motion has been to table 903 till after we vote on 904. There's been a motion by Director Beck and a second by Director Snyder. I will call the vote on that. Director Beck?
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Hayes,
Yes.
Director Klein Jerome,
Yes.
Director Poston,
Yes.
Director Potts,
Yes.
and my vote is yes. 90.3 has been tabled until after 9:04. Can I get a motion on 9:04?
Mr. President,
Director Beck,
I move that the board approve the early retirement incentive as presented.
Second.
second Director Poston. Is there any discussion? Director Beck.
Yes, I had several questions which I addressed to Interim Superintendent Schneckloth and got answers, but I wanted to ask them so that the public could get those answers as well. And I think we covered some of it a little bit now, or a little bit in our discussions before. But the number one question was, why are we not able to just cut positions such as some of the ones that were listed in the document we passed in March, rather than offer an early retirement incentive? So I guess that's my first question.
Is this a question?
I don't know who can answer that question. I guess it's you. Are you saying why don't we like cut teachers right now? Because
Not
they're under-
teachers, not teachers. I said, why are we not able to cut positions in order to save this money? So here's the rationale for asking that.
Well, many of them have contracts that we can't break. They
Right.
are under contract through the rest of the year.
Okay. So financial exigency is often a reason for termination of a contract, correct? Or no?
I've never seen it applied in this district.
I don't know. And our administrators have the same types of contracts as my
Yes.
other question. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Of the list of things that were talked about in to the SBRC in March, those were items that probably there might have been less than 5 positions that were on that list that could be acted upon at will. The rest of them are contracted. And frankly, those were positions that if that SBRC hearing happened in March, there are a lot of those positions that would have had to have been acted upon within the next couple of weeks after that. There's a deadline for teachers, there's a deadline for administrators, but once you get past that deadline, then it's a continuing contract situation that if you let them know ahead of time, you can take action. If you do not let them know ahead of that deadline, then you cannot take action. They have a continuing contract.
Okay. So the next question I had was this kind of similar. One of the things I feel like we've heard a lot implicitly from the State Board of Education is that we are top heavy. And my concern is that we are going to lose positions that are affecting students directly on a daily basis. It really concerns me that we're going to lose teachers in the middle of a school year when we keep hearing that we are top heavy in terms of central office. So I guess I don't know if there's an answer to that. That's my concern, that we're not going to lose the positions that we need to be losing. We're going to lose positions that affect students the most directly, rather than the ones that students don't see on a daily basis. And I have real concerns about that.
So the tool that's available at this time of the year is the one that's being used, and nobody likes it. Nobody would choose this. Gary wouldn't choose that. I wouldn't choose that. The Department of Ed wouldn't choose that. But it's the option that's available to us at this time of the year. At the March SBRC meeting, there were options that could have been taken at that time that would have been different. But, I think the comments that you made could have been very valid to the list that was up in front of SBRC as well. 30 teaching positions were on that list. That's not pleasant. It's not desirable. But we do have to recall that we're talking about a district that does have declining enrollment. So you can't have a stable and actually in many cases a growing population of staff to serve a shrinking population of students. And so some of that it's inevitable. The thing that this tool is trying to do is use attrition. And that's what would have happened if this had been done in March or April. You would try to use attrition. And so you're not cutting people, you're cutting positions. Nobody wants to cut people. We all care for each other. But at the same time, that reality of declining enrollment versus the staff something has to give there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Director Caution?
Yeah, at the finance committee meeting, we had the same discussion, and it concerns me too. You got a third grader in one of the elementary schools. The teacher takes early retirement, so at semester time, all of a sudden, they got a new teacher. But going back to Bill's comments, this is about the only choice we have. And my specific question to Gary Sinclair that day was, do we have your blessing on this? And his answer was yes. He said that's about our only option that we have.
Okay.
I even expand. Gary would not, in an ideal world, want to do this. I would not want to do this. But the blessing is because if this plan is not approved by the board, then that level of cut is going to happen. And you have some choice over it in this being put in front of you. If this is not approved, what is going to need to go to the SBRC is going to need to show what we talked about earlier. It has to show that the district is committed to doing what it has said it will do, and does need to finish this year positive as the district committed to finishing this year positive. And I think this is the best option. Gary thinks this is the best option. If this isn't approved, then you're going to get to worse options that frankly the district locally won't have choice on. And so I just highly recommend that if you find it not palatable, then you will join the rest of us that find it not palatable. But it is the best option for this time of year since action wasn't taken last March. And you will have more control when you think about this budget process going forward. Gary is going to give you the alternatives next spring if that is a need, and you will have control. But we don't right now.
I appreciate that explanation. Couple more questions. I'm sorry. So, number one, if not enough people take the early retirement option, are we going to have to turn to layoffs anyway?
Well, you can't lay them off now. I mean, it would be for next school year.
Okay.
So
So
that's not going to be an option.
it's not going to be an
now.
option for the middle of the year. We won't reach our target is basically what's going to happen.
There's probably some of that would play into when Gary was saying that we built some cushion into that. So if this is a little bit off base, it's probably going to be part of that cushion. If it's way off base and early retirement comes in at $20,000 instead of $2 million, then there's going to have to be an alternative strategy. And I don't know that I would want to speculate what that alternative strategy would be right now. And frankly, I don't anticipate that it's going to be a problem, but that's just a good guess, I hope.
Okay. My last question. We heard from one person in open forum about extending the opportunity to all staff. And Gary did address why we didn't do that in this plan. But I guess what would the negatives of extending it to other people as well?
Hi, Allison. This is Jamie. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, perfect. So, and what Gary mentioned was when we looked at this, we took all of the data that Lisa's team pulled together and costed out all of the salaries and benefits. And we had to hone in on these three groups because of what ultimately the average salary would be. Unfortunately, if we add those other bargaining groups, it brings down that targeted salary, average salary. So just so everyone knows, when we looked at this, and Gary could confirm as well, is, we were looking at the salaries, the cost of the salaries, the cost of benefits, also what the management fund can manage itself with what's available in there, considering that we just had an early retirement at the end of last year. So there's multiple factors into consideration when making this decision.
Okay. Thank you. I guess, I mean, if people want to take advantage of this, even if they have lower salaries, yes, the average available salary might go down, but every little bit counts, I guess, is what I'm trying to think
But
of.
there's also, if I don't know if Gary's still on or not, but we also had to take a look at what the management fund could support. And the more people, we are limiting it to 40. So we're hoping to get 40 people out of this group. And with those 40 people comes a target of $2 million. And if we open it up beyond that, we still have 3 years worth of early retirements being pulled out this year. And then, next year, still 2 years then plus this year. So there's a rolling on, because this has been used as more of a benefit than an incentive. So there's more money being pulled out each year, and we can't at this time open it up to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
In the presentation today, you've heard that the special ed deficit creates pressure on the levy.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard what was the other one? There was another pressure on the levy that was upcoming. I mean, and then in addition, declining enrollment. So if you would add this to pressure on the levy, because every person that goes up adds a significant amount of money over the next 4 or 5 years to that amount, and you add another pressure to the levy point, then what you're going to be facing in FY23 is a levy rate for taxpayers in Davenport that will go up significantly. And right now, I think what Gary is working very hard is to find a way to balance the cash reserve levy, the management levy, special ed deficit, and the general fund, in which, in FY22, one of them goes up a little bit, FY23, one of them goes down a little bit, and we try to make that be as consistent of a levy as we can. So adding another pressure point, it would make a significant difference to you as a board member in FY23 on the tax rate. And none of you are allowed to decide if you're going to be on the board in FY23 or not. You can't do that. You would see me smiling if I didn't have a mask on.
Director Klein-Jerome.
But we're also saying that these 40 people that take this will not be replaced. Whereas some of the other if you are the building secretary, they got to have that building secretary. I, as a teacher in the building, I really rely on them. I rely on those pairs. They're going to have to be replaced. Not to say that teachers shouldn't be replaced, but they're not going to be replaced. Or the principal, or, so when you're looking at those 40, they are not going to be replaced. What if, I like to be optimistic, what if 45 people say they want to go? Does the management levy support that? I mean, could we go up to 45? I mean, is there?
We would need to, we modeled it out based on the 40 with the $50,000 per person. I would say if we have more than 40, then that's something that I could definitely spend some time with Gary on, kind of modeling out those additional early retirees.
Okay, thank you.
I will tell you that Gary's tolerance for how high the management levy would go is probably about as high as he's in our conversation, about as high as he would recommend that you go with 40 positions.
Director Hayes?
I have a couple questions. With the individuals leaving in February, how does this affect our students?
There is no doubt that has an effect. You know, Director Poston talked about that in Finance Committee, and he repeated that now. You know, I think that I believe Director Poston made this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, thinking that secondary students, if you know you start second semester and you have a different algebra teacher in one block, and I mean that's actually pretty normal. And so it's probably that elementary level where it's abnormal. At the same time, I would go back to what I was telling you before. This is a decision that likely should have happened with those 30 teaching positions that were talked about to SBRC. And, you know, I believe there should be confidence by children and parents that if they do move, they will move to another high quality teacher and get high quality instruction in the school, and that the administrative team will make sure that that happens. Will it require that change that is not ideal? Absolutely. And that's the biggest downside. That's why, you know, we were saying earlier, this would not be what Gary would recommend. This isn't what I would like to see happen. This isn't what the administration would like to see happen. But it is a way of getting done what should have happened in March in a way that is that ongoing scenario that we talked about. Remember when Gary said we have been directed to look at ongoing cuts, ongoing reductions, not just one time. And it is a way for us to do that. So fully acknowledge that it's not ideal. And I wish that was not something that we needed to do. But that money has to be found somewhere.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. The next question may be for Jamie. I'm wondering if there's been to date, I know it's open until the 30th, but to date, can you say how many people that may have shown interest? I know you said up to 40, but have some people come forward that they would be willing to do it?
We haven't gone out. We were waiting for the board to approve it before sending any communications out. Since it was posted to the board agenda on late last week, I've been getting some questions about how it would work. But again, waiting until it was approved. And then once it's approved, then we can start having information sessions and opening up that dialogue to get a better understanding of where the interest may lie.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's almost a first because normally we approve things after they've taken place. So I'm really glad to hear that we're kind of in the beginning stages of this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have anything?
While we are on this topic, I do think that it is important to probably address an elephant in the room about this topic. One of the conversations that both Karen and Kent were a part of was the idea that this has become quite routine in the district, and that is not a healthy situation. If it's meant to be a benefit, then it should be negotiated. If it's truly an early retirement incentive, then it should be targeted. And that means that it is not something that should happen on a yearly basis. It should happen when the district needs to make cuts, most likely in response to a reduction in enrollment. When we get things to be healthy, that's when it should happen, is when the district needs to use it to find positions to make this happen through attrition instead of by pink slipping people. And this shouldn't be something that happens on an annual basis for every single retiree to be a part of. Now, I know that's an elephant in the room, and there are many people that don't want to hear that, but that is something that is not a healthy situation for the district. If it's a benefit, quite honestly, it is viewed differently by both management and by staff. That is different from what its intention is. So I would encourage the board to develop some clarity around that too, where it becomes more explicit of, is this going to be a benefit that is viewed as a retirement benefit, or is this going to be an early retirement incentive? And there's a very big difference. Right now it is termed as an early retirement incentive, but it has become used as a retirement benefit. And that's going to take more conversation to figure out where you can be financially and where you want to be as a board.
Director Kleindrum.
Wishful thinking. I mean, yes, if it's a benefit, we should bargain it, but that's not allowed anymore. So that's the downside of calling it a benefit. Jamie, how many people could qualify under the conditions we've set? Do you have an idea of numbers?
Sure. So I looked at, we have 362 people that would be eligible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Beck.
One last question, just because I want to make sure that somebody has looked into this. If all 40 of those people who choose early retirement happen to be teachers in classrooms, are we sure that we can maintain the appropriate social distancing by combining classrooms and shifting students around? Do we have, and minimum class or maximum class sizes? Have we investigated that?
Allison, can I jump in real quick on the, within the early retirement plan, the board does have some rights as far as putting caps on certain positions. So, ultimately, when we first started this journey, we were looking at it just being teachers, but making the decision that we couldn't cut 40 teachers. We broadened the pool to other groups. So I think if we start getting to the point where as a district we can't support the classrooms with those numbers of teachers leaving, then I think that's where we'll have to have further discussions on capping for that group.
Thank you, Jamie. I did see that language in there, and I appreciate that that's already been considered. That makes a big difference along the lines of what Director Hayes said. I appreciate that it's been considered already. Thank you.
Director Snyder.
On the opposite side of that, my question is, what if a number of these positions are building principals? We're banking on basically going forward that those positions wouldn't be refilled, but you have to have a building principal, so we would be refilling those. So where is the savings then?
That's one I think you would probably want to ask Jamie on the conversation between Gary and she on that topic as well. My answer would probably be very similar to the last one, that there would be a number that the board could accept or not accept there as well.
Yeah, and it's also looking at what other staff might be available if we needed to rearrange, potentially, depending on the number of principals that would be interested in taking that. There are assistant principals and associate principals. We would have to take a strategic look at maybe rearranging or reassigning individuals.
Any other question? Any other questions? President Potts, you got anything? You might still be on mute.
I do not.
went to bed.
All right, thank you. I do have a question. So, and I'm glad you guys kind of explained the rationale why you offered it to some groups and not. My question is, one of our citations, disproportionality. You offered it to some groups, but not all. How, and we're supposed to look at this stuff, so how is it fair to tell us in a previous meeting that we should be looking at that kind of stuff, and now we're doing that? We're segregating, I shouldn't say it that way, but I mean, we are. You're not good enough for this because you don't make enough money because we dictate how much money we pay you when we bargain with you, but these people make more money, so we're going to offer it to them. And then if we don't get any of the higher salaried positions that take this early retirement incentive, then we're going to have to make cuts in other places. Whereas if we would have offered it up to all the groups, we might have gotten more out of that or something. And you know what I mean? Does that make sense what I said? If anybody can stab at that, that'd be great.
Sure. So to kind of go back to what I mentioned to Allison is that there's only so much money in the management fund. So I know looking at last year, when the early retirement incentive came up, there's approximately 60 people that participated. If we were to open it up to everyone and have more than 40 people, the management fund wouldn't be able to support that. Then also it's not an equity review at this point because it's strictly a financial review. And with an early retirement, what we do have to be cautious of is, discrimination on age, but we can, I ran it past legal. We can designate for financial reasons the groups that we need to target. And like Karen said earlier, there's certain groups, maintenance or secretaries. If somebody leaves, we would need to replace them. So basically, you're paying out an early retirement incentive of $50,000, but then bringing somebody back in and picking up those benefits costs again.
I understand all that. I'm just saying that was one of our citations, and you're pretty much guiding us to do that. Which, I understand we have to do this. I get it. It sucks. And it's the only way to really do things. We probably should have negotiated contracts a lot sooner, and we would have known where we were at with a lot of this stuff.
Director Gosa, I can say with confidence this does not it's not related to, nor will it shine any negativity on a disproportionality piece. I get your point that it is treating different groups differently, but this is not what the district has been cited for. The disproportionality among student groups and student achievement and student discipline are not related to this topic.
Well, it's disproportionality either way you cut it, but I understand what you're saying. Does anyone have anything else? Director Snyder.
I guess I'm still not completely content with the reasoning because, again, if you go back to building principles, you're going to have to replace that position. And yes, you would move somebody up, but now you're taking somebody and giving them a raise to become a building principal. I understand that basically we're between a rock and a hard place, and we don't have a lot of options right now, but I'm still not content with the reasoning to, that we're trying to go to the higher paid positions when, essentially, we are going to be creating higher salaried openings by doing this if building principals leave. So
the challenge has been we can't, it's all speculation on who would, that is part of the discussions that we've had, but we don't know who would or wouldn't take it. And then from there, I think, I don't know if Bill or TJ would want to discuss, we would have to make rearrangements. The intent wouldn't be bringing in new people. You would be looking at your reassigning of your current staff that would be available to backfill those positions.
Anybody have anything else?
Mr. Vice President?
Mr. President,
Yeah, Jamie, I have a question. What is you may not be able to do this off the top of your head, but what's the salary spread between a senior principal who's at the top and someone who may replace a principal who's at the top of the salary schedule? Let's say I'll just pick junior high.
I would have to go back to our costing model to take a look at those specific examples. I'm sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay, I would guess that it's somewhere between 30 and 40 grand.
did you have anything else, President Potts?
No, that's all.
Anybody have anything else? I do want to say I am going to vote for this because obviously we need to do this. We told the SBRC we were going to make these cuts, and again, the ball's been dropped, and we're going to pick it up and run with it and move forward. So seeing no other discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. And it looks like Director Beck made the motion.
Wait, yes, I did make the motion. Yes.
Director Poston.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Hayes.
Yes.
Director Klein Jerome.
Yes.
Director Potts.
Yes.
And my vote is yes, motion carries. Now we need to go back to the table 903. Can I make a motion on that?
Mr. Vice President,
Director Beck.
I move that the board approve the SBRC application as presented with any minor changes that are deemed necessary as outlined by Gary Sinclair.
Second.
Second, Director Poston. Is there any discussion? Director Snyder.
What would we consider a minor change that we'd be pre-approving, essentially?
I don't have that in front of me. Gary Sinclair had it up earlier, so the things that were in red would be examples that would be similar to what he's talking about. The one that I happen to remember is it said the group of TJ, myself, Shane Williams, and the Department of Ed are meeting weekly, and we actually meet twice per week, and so that was something that was added in there, and that was in red. So that's probably about as minor as you could get. I think there were maybe some other wording changes or some things that were maybe implied and they were made more explicit, but no real change in the actual meaning of the document.
All right, thank you. I trust Gary's recommendation, but I just, when I first hear the words that, we may change something after you approve it, something clicks upstairs that's not the norm.
Does Director Beck?
I guess I would suggest that Director Snyder could say that any changes to numbers or something like that. I mean, you can make a motion to not, that we have to be notified of any changes.
Well,
Or an amendment.
I don't want to go that far because I don't want to delay any basically applications. I don't want to delay any filings. I don't want to delay anything. I would hope that if there's anything major, it would be brought to the board.
I can assure you of that. It would definitely be brought to the board if it were something other than just proofing or something like that.
And I did say changes as noted by Gary Sinclair to kind of clarify that language.
My only request is that the board gets the final thing that gets presented because something came up earlier in a different meeting about us asking about something, saying we wanted it done, but we had voted on it. So I just want to make sure that shouldn't be too big of a deal. Is there any other discussion? President Potts, you got anything?
Nope.
All right, I'm going to call for the vote. Director Beck?
Yes.
Director Postian?
Yes.
Director Klein Jerome?
Yes.
Director Hayes?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director Potts?
Yes.
And my vote is yes, motion carries. Now, board requests, are there any board requests? All right, any administrative reports? Other than you guys are filling out the application for the, I just want to get you on record saying that. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So move.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thanks everybody for staying.